So if I gave you a blank map right now, like just a totally empty piece of paper and infinite money,
Okay, I like where this is going.
right? And I told you to build the absolute perfect society for you, for your family, what is the very first thing you would ban? And I guess what's the first thing you would absolutely guarantee?
Oh man, that's the ultimate trap right there.
It really is. Today, we are basically tearing up the blueprints of human history. We want to figure out why every single quote-unquote utopia has just ended in total disaster.
And usually a very messy disaster.
Oh, absolutely. But more importantly, we are looking at this radical new document that actually claims to have finally cracked the code on how to do this right.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating puzzle because, if you think utopia is just this static place where all human problems are solved forever, well, you've already failed.
You're dead on arrival.
Exactly. The real secret, the thing we're going to unpack today, is how to build a society that doesn't just sit perfectly still, but one that continuously rebalances itself just to survive.
Right. And for those of you listening right now, I want to make this super clear right up front. I know this sounds like grand sci-fi world-building stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like we're playing a video game.
Totally.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about empires and nation-states and macroeconomics. But the tensions we are going to dissect today, like the tug of war between having absolute freedom and needing strict order.
Or between wanting rapid innovation and needing, safe stability.
Yes, these are the exact same tensions you navigate every single day, whether you are trying to manage a totally dysfunctional team at your workplace or maybe organizing a neighborhood HOA that's falling apart.
Good luck with the HOA.
Right. Or honestly, just trying to keep your family from melting down on a Tuesday morning. You are wrestling with these exact same fundamental forces.
The scale obviously changes, absolutely, but human nature, it doesn't budge an inch. The friction of people just simply trying to coexist is totally universal.
It really is.
And the document we are diving into today, which is this really massive, fascinating manifesto titled The Next Utopia.pdf, it maps that human friction just beautifully. It takes us on a huge journey.
And what a journey it actually is.
Yeah.
We are going to survey the absolute high water marks of ancient and modern empires.
All the heavy hitters.
Yep, we're going to look under the hood of why historical utopias burned to the ground, and sometimes literally burned. And then we're going to walk through the author's incredibly detailed 10-part thought experiment for a modern society.
Which they call subpersonatopia.
Right, subpersonatopia. And here is the real kicker for this deep dive. We aren't just leaving this in the realm of theory. We're going to map this upgraded civilization onto a very specific real-world location on the map.
Which is going to surprise a lot of people, I think.
It definitely surprised me. But before we get to building the future, we kind of have to look backward. If we want to design the best society, we need to ask, has anyone actually pulled this off before?
The short answer is no.
Shocker.
Right. But the long answer is where it actually gets super interesting. The document points out that best is a really loaded term. It depends entirely on what your specific culture values at any given moment in time.
Like, what are you optimizing for?
Exactly. Do you want absolute stability or do you want explosive economic growth? Do you prioritize collective safety or individual liberty? You really can't have 100% of everything.
Just can't.
But the text provides a really nuanced tour of the strongest historical contenders, breaking down what they maximize and exactly what they had to sacrifice to get it.
So let's walk through those heavy hitters. First up, the undisputed master of scale and stability, the Roman Empire.
Yeah. When you look at Rome, you are looking at the ultimate optimization of infrastructure and legal order.
The Pax Romana.
Exactly, the Pax Romana. This roughly 200-year period of relative peace across a massive, incredibly diverse territory spanning 3 continents. And how did they do it? It wasn't just, swinging swords and military might.
Right, it was logistics.
Sheer logistical genius. They built over 250,000 miles of roads. They engineered aqueducts that delivered fresh water to millions of people.
Which is just mind-blowing for the time.
It really is. They created a complex, standardized legal code that basically meant a merchant up in Britannia could do business with a supplier down in Egypt under the exact same basic rules. They mastered the mechanics of moving food, water, and armies across the known world.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because it's like creating a character in an RPG video game.
Yeah.
You only have a set number of skill points to allocate when you start.
I love that analogy.
Right, so if you dump all your skill points into the infrastructure and logistics stats like Rome did, you might get unparalleled engineering.
Yeah.
But your other stats are going to be completely empty, and for Rome, their equality and human rights stats were literally at zero.
Yeah, absolutely at zero. Because to build those roads and feed that massive empire, they relied on a brutal foundational system of mass slavery. And economically, the inequality was just staggering. A tiny fraction of a percent of the elite patrician class held virtually all the wealth. Meanwhile, the urban poor in Rome relied on the annona, the free grain dole, just to avoid literally starving to death in the streets.
Just a total pirate cake.
Totally. And structurally, because power was entirely concentrated in the hands of whoever commanded the most military legions, their political stability eventually just rotted from the inside out.
Endless civil wars.
Endless succession crises. They optimized for power and reach, but they sacrificed basic human dignity.
So if Rome was the master of concrete and law, let's look at another empire that optimized for something entirely different, the Achaemenid Empire.
Ancient Persia.
Right, this is the source document's example of the tolerance model.
Yes. Founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BC, they stand out in human history because they were one of the very first superpowers to explicitly engineer their state around cultural and religious tolerance.
Which was basically unheard of back then.
Completely unheard of. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, he didn't force the Babylonians to adopt Persian gods or Persian customs. He actually freed enslaved populations, including the Jewish people, and funded the rebuilding of their temples.
Wait, okay, but how does an empire actually function if everyone is just doing their own thing? Like, how do you keep it together without forcing everyone to assimilate into one culture?
It's clever. They centralized the wealth, but decentralized the culture. They used a system of satraps, essentially regional governors.
Oh, right.
And as long as a region paid its taxes and provided soldiers when the emperor asked, the central government left their local customs, their religions, and their daily laws completely alone.
Wow.
It was an incredibly efficient way to administer a wildly diverse group of people. Their superpower was managing difference without forcing sameness.
But the trade-off here is fragility at the very top, right? Like, they were still an absolute monarch.
Oh, absolutely.
You are entirely dependent on having this benevolent, genius-level administrator sitting on the throne. If Cyrus the Great is replaced by someone incompetent or paranoid, that delicate web of tolerance just snaps.
It falls apart instantly. The system only works if the single point of failure, which is the emperor, doesn't fail.
Right. Okay, so let's shift to a society that optimized for something else entirely. The Tang Dynasty in China. The document highlights this as the ultimate cultural golden age. We are talking about the 7th to 10th centuries.
Yeah. If you were alive then, the capital city of Chang'an was basically the center of the world. It had a population of over 1 million people.
Which is huge.
I mean, when European cities were practically mud villages, Chang'an was a metropolis.
And it wasn't just big. It was the global hub of art, poetry, and technology. Woodblock printing, gunpowder, massive advancements in astronomy and medicine. But what really fascinates me here is how they structured their society.
The civil service exams.
Yes. They didn't just rely on noble birth. They scaled up these imperial exams. If you wanted power, you had to pass brutal, rigorous tests on literature, philosophy, and administration. They prioritized intellectual flourishing.
It was a total explosion of human creativity.
Right.
But again, let's look at the trade-offs. If we check our RPG stat sheet again, their structural stability was actually highly volatile.
Because it was so top-heavy.
Exactly.
Right.
Because it was a deeply hierarchical agrarian empire, peasant life was just incredibly hard. And when the system fractured, it fractured catastrophically. The An-Lushan Rebellion in the 8th century resulted in the deaths of millions. Millions. And it permanently crippled the dynasty's power.
Brilliant culture, but a really brittle foundation.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got infrastructure with Rome, tolerance with Persia, and culture with the Tang. What about the money? Where does the modern economy actually start in this analysis?
For that, the source text points us to the Dutch Golden Age in the 17th century. This is what they call the innovation economy. The Netherlands is essentially the birthplace of modern capitalism as we understand it today.
They invented the multinational corporation, right?
Yep, the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company. They invented the first formal stock exchange. They basically pioneered modern insurance and risk management.
That's a lot of firsts.
It is. And because they had a very high tolerance for different religious and scientific ideas, partly born out of their long war for independence from Catholic Spain, they became this huge magnet for thinkers and merchants from all over Europe.
But here is where we have to look at the absolute darkest side of those trade-offs.
Yeah.
They built the highest urban living standards in the world at the time. They funded Rembrandt and Vermeer, but they paid for a massive portion of it through brutal, systemic colonial exploitation.
Oh, completely.
The spice trade in Indonesia, the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, they essentially outsourced the suffering required to fund their domestic utopia.
That is the really dark arithmetic of that era. Wealth creation at home was directly tied to extraction abroad, which actually brings us to the final historical benchmark. And this is the only modern one the document really focuses on.
Denmark and the broader Nordic model.
Exactly. This is the gold standard for well-being.
Right. The happiness indexes. Every single year we see the headlines. Denmark, Finland, Norway rank as the happiest, most trusting places on Earth.
And it's not just a vague feeling. It's heavily engineered. They have managed to balance a highly competitive free market economy with an incredibly robust social safety net. It's a system they call flexicurity.
Flexicurity, I like that.
Yeah, it basically means it's very easy for companies to hire and fire people, which keeps the economy super dynamic and innovative.
Right.
But the state provides massive support, retraining, and free healthcare for anyone who loses a job. This creates a society with incredibly high social trust. You don't fear falling through the cracks, so your baseline daily anxiety is incredibly low.
But I'm looking at the trade-offs here. And you and I both know you can't get that for free. The taxes are astronomical compared to places like the U.S.
Very high, yeah.
And more fundamentally, the text points out a demographic reality. This model was built in, and works best in, relatively small, highly culturally cohesive populations.
Right, when everyone looks like you, shares your specific history, and has the exact same cultural norms.
Exactly.
Oh.
It is much easier to build a consensus to pay 50% of your income in taxes to support your neighbor if you feel like your neighbor is basically family. The massive question today is whether that Nordic model can scale or if it can survive deep demographic changes.
So if we pull all of these historical examples together, the author of the document reveals a really vital pattern. The best society isn't a single place you can just point to on a map or in a history book. You can't just copy-paste Rome or Denmark.
Wow.
The ultimate society has to be a composite.
Right. A Frankenstein's monster of the best parts of history. We want Roman-level infrastructure so the power never goes out. We want Persian-level tolerance so people can live authentically. We want Tang-level cultural richness so life is actually beautiful. Dutch-level innovation so we keep advancing. And Nordic-level well-being so nobody is left behind.
Exactly. And the brutal truth of human history is that no civilization has ever fully combined all five of those simultaneously.
Because they actively fight each other.
They do.
But okay, if we know what the ultimate composite looks like in theory, we need to understand how these pieces actually function mechanically on a daily basis. So this actually brings us to the real meat of the document, the 5 pillars, the foundational elements that make a society run. Let's start with pillar 1, infrastructure.
Right. Infrastructure is the physical and digital backbone of civilization. It answers the most fundamental question, can society actually function? And we aren't just talking about pouring concrete for highways here.
No, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. The document breaks it down into layered systems. First, you have transportation logistics ports, rail networks, airports. If you can't move goods and emergency services efficiently, your economy just chokes.
And second, utilities, the invisible lifelines. Water supplies, sewage, electricity. I mean, if the water stops flowing, civilization collapses in about 72 hours.
Literally.
And don't forget communication and energy. Broadband internet isn't a luxury anymore. It's how the nervous system of a country coordinates. And energy grids. Are they resilient? If a massive winter storm hits, does your power grid fail, leaving millions freezing in their homes?
The document uses a great modern example here. Japan's Shinkansen, their bullet train network. It has operated for over 60 years, carrying billions of passengers with 0 fatal accidents.
0? That's insane.
0. And that isn't just a technological marvel. That is a major indicator of deep institutional trust. Infrastructure is ultimately about reliability. It's the promise a society makes to its citizens that the physical world will not betray them today.
So if pillar 1 is the physical world, pillar 2 is the human world. Tolerance. And I really appreciate how the source frames this. Tolerance is not a feeling. It's not about everyone holding hands and singing songs around a campfire.
No, it's purely structural.
Right. It answers the question, can people coexist?
That is a crucial distinction. Tolerance is a legal and structural mechanism for managing conflict without resorting to violence or forced assimilation. How do your courts treat ethnic minorities? Do you have explicit protections for freedom of expression and religion?
The text brings up the Ottoman Empire's millet system here, which I found fascinating.
It's a perfect example of structural tolerance over emotional tolerance. The Ottomans ruled a vast territory of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. But instead of forcing one single legal code on everyone, the millet system allowed different religious communities to govern their own personal and civil affairs.
So, like, they handle their own stuff internally.
Exactly. An Orthodox Christian went to an Orthodox court for a marriage dispute. A Jewish merchant used a Jewish court for a local contract. It wasn't modern liberal democracy, but it was an incredibly pragmatic mechanism for coexistence.
That makes sense.
It proved that you don't need everyone to agree on the ultimate truth, you just need them to agree on the basic rules of engagement.
Okay, pillar 3, cultural richness. If infrastructure is the backbone, culture is the soul. It answers the question, does life have meaning?
Because you can have the most perfectly engineered city on Earth where the trains arrive to the microsecond and the courts are perfectly fair. But if there's no art, no music, no shared rituals, no incredible cuisine or storytelling, people will just be utterly miserable.
They'll just exist.
Right. Culture is what a society creates and celebrates. The Italian Renaissance is the classic example here. An absolute explosion of humanism, painting, and philosophy that gave life a sense of transcendent purpose beyond mere survival.
Which flows right into pillar 4, innovation. Answering the question, can society evolve? And this is all about how a society creates new things, science, tech, entrepreneurship. But the secret ingredient here, according to the text, isn't just having a bunch of smart people, it's risk tolerance.
Exactly. Let's look at the actual mechanics of innovation. To invent something new, you have to try something that has never been done before, and most of the time, it will fail.
You're going to mess up.
Right. And if your society severely punishes failure, whether through crushing bankruptcy laws that ruin your life forever, or political systems that literally execute scientists who question the status quo, innovation dies instantly.
The text points to the Islamic Golden Age in places like Baghdad with the House of Wisdom. They were translating Greek texts, inventing algebra, advancing medicine, purely because they created an environment where intellectual risk-taking was subsidized and celebrated by the state rather than treated as heresy.
Yes. And finally, we hit pillar 5, well-being. This is the ground truth. It answers the ultimate question. Is life actually good?
Right, the lived experience.
This is the lived experience of the average citizen. What is their physical health, their mental health? Do they have economic security? What is the baseline level of social trust when they just walk out their front door in the morning?
Because you could have a society as powerful as Rome or as innovative as the Dutch Republic, and if the average person is working 80 hours a week just to barely afford rent and is terrified of getting sick, the society is failing them.
Exactly. The text highlights New Zealand here, which actually created a well-being budget. It requires all new government spending to prove how it will directly improve the mental and physical health of the public, not just increase the raw GDP.
So we have the 5 tellers: function, coexistence, meaning, evolution, and lived experience.
Yeah.
Now think about the catastrophic tensions between them. What happens when you maximize infrastructure and efficiency, but you completely remove tolerance?
You get authoritarian efficiency. The trains run exactly on time, the streets are spotless, but dissidents are disappeared in the middle of the night.
Terrifying. What if you maximize massive innovation and relentless economic drive, but you strip away well-being and social safety nets?
Then you get a brutal, hyper-capitalist burnout culture. Millions of people just grinding themselves into dust to build the future, but they're way too stressed and sick to actually enjoy it.
And what if you maximize cultural richness and well-being, but completely neglect infrastructure and innovation?
You get a beautiful, happy, incredibly fragile society. A gorgeous city filled with artists that completely collapses the first time there's a drought or supply chain crisis, simply because nobody bothered to build a resilient water grid.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If we have the recipe, these 5 pillars, why hasn't anyone managed to bake the perfect cake yet? Has anyone actually tried?
Oh, many have tried. And every single attempt has ended in a spectacular, highly educational disaster.
Kitchen fires everywhere.
The source document dedicates a whole section to analyzing these failures. It categorizes them to show us exactly which assumptions break when you try to force humans into a perfect mold.
Let's walk through these historical kitchen fires, starting with the philosophical utopias. The ones designed purely on paper by intellectuals who genuinely thought they could solve human nature with a pen. The classic, of course, is Thomas More's Utopia, published back in 1516. I mean, he literally invented the word.
He did. And if you read More's text, you see exactly how his mechanics were supposed to work. He wanted to maximize well-being and equality. So how did he do it? He abolished private property entirely. No one owned anything. There was no money. People worked only 6 hours a day and then spent all their free time learning. Sounds great, right?
Until you read the fine print.
Exactly. To enforce this perfect economic equality, he had to completely obliterate individual freedom. Everyone had to wear the exact same clothes. You weren't allowed to travel without permission. Houses had no locks on the doors, and people were literally forced to rotate houses every 10 years so no one got attached to their stuff.
Which sounds like a nightmare.
And crucially, a detail often forgotten, the society still relied on slaves to do the worst jobs.
The underlying assumption was that people would just cooperate. That if you took away money, people would magically lose their ego, their ambition, their desire for basic privacy. It's wild.
The mechanical insight here is profound. Perfect fairness almost always requires imperfect freedom. If you want everyone to have the exact same outcome, you have to use a massive amount of authoritarian force to suppress the people who naturally want to work harder or differently than the group.
Then there's Plato's Republic, written way back around 375 BC. He was trying to optimize for perfect, stable governance, and his solution was the famous philosopher kings.
Right.
A ruling class of elites who were bred and educated from birth purely to rule with logic and wisdom, completely detached from material wealth.
But the mechanics of Plato's society are honestly terrifying to modern ears. It was a rigid caste system. There was a myth, the noble lie, propagated by the state to convince people they were born with gold, silver, or iron in their souls, just to keep them in their specific social class.
Just massive manipulation.
Yep. He advocated for state-controlled reproduction, essentially eugenics, to breed better citizens, and heavy censorship of poetry and art, because culture might stir up irrational emotions that disrupt the perfect logical order.
But the most glaring structural flaw here is the assumption of the philosopher king itself. The text hammers this point. Relying on a perfect ruler is the most fragile engineering assumption in the history of human governance.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like building a 100-story skyscraper that will only stay standing if the wind never ever blows.
Right.
It's terrible design. The moment your wise king dies and his idiot nephew takes over, the whole utopia collapses.
Right, so those are the paper utopias, but people also tried to build these things in the real world. Small-scale, experimental communities.
Like New Harmony, Indiana, in 1825,
Mm-hmm.
founded by Robert Owen. He was an industrialist who genuinely believed that environment dictates character. If you put people in a perfect environment with shared labor, shared resources, and equal education, they would become perfect cooperative people, a totally rational living situation.
And it collapsed into chaotic infighting in less than 3 years.
Big surprise.
Why? Because Owen fundamentally misunderstood human incentive structures. He implemented a system where people were paid in labor notes based on hours worked, regardless of the value or difficulty of the work. If a highly skilled blacksmith worked for an hour, he got the exact same reward as someone lazily sweeping a porch for an hour.
Which immediately creates resentment. If I'm busting my back and you're slacking off, but we both get the exact same slice of bread, I'm either going to stop working hard or I'm going to punch you. Good intentions do not solve coordination problems. You have to have incentives.
Another great example the text uses is Brook Farm in Massachusetts in the 1840s. This was the transcendentalist utopia. George Ripley, Nathaniel Hawthorne, a bunch of brilliant intellectuals who wanted to balance high cultural richness with manual labor. The idea was you'd farm in the morning and discuss philosophy in the afternoon.
And what happened?
The intellectuals were terrible farmers.
Right.
They couldn't generate enough revenue to sustain the community. They fell into massive debt. They tried to save themselves by building a massive, highly structured communal building called a phalanstery, but before it was even finished, it caught fire and burned to the ground.
Wow.
Because they didn't have the proper infrastructure or insurance to recover?
It's the ultimate metaphor. Your beautiful philosophical ideals cannot save you if you don't have boring things like functional logistics, budgets, and fire insurance. Okay, so small-scale utopias fail because of bad incentives and bad logistics. What about the massive ideological utopias? The source document is very impartial here. It looks at both extremes. Let's start with the attempt at a Marxist utopia, the Soviet Union.
The goal of the Soviet system in its theoretical inception was to maximize well-being for the working class by eliminating capitalist exploitation. The mechanism they chose was massive, absolute central planning. The state, specifically the agency called Gosplan, tried to calculate the exact price and production quota for roughly 24 million different types of goods.
Which is mathematically impossible. Without the organic price signals of a free market, they had no idea what people actually needed.
Exactly. They achieved rapid, brutal industrialization. Pillar 1, infrastructure. But the cost was catastrophic. To enforce this total economic equality and planning, they had to eradicate individual freedom.
Tolerance was non-existent.
Innovation stagnated entirely outside of the military-industrial complex because taking a risk that failed was seen as sabotage against the state. Power concentrated so heavily at the top that it birthed immense corruption.
The source states the insight here so plainly. Equality without freedom almost always metastasizes into control. But on the flip side, let's look at the Enlightenment democracies, the capitalist liberal model like the early vision of the United States.
Here, the mechanism was entirely different. The attempt was to maximize freedom, tolerance, and innovation. The idea was that if you guarantee individual rights and let free markets run, the invisible hand will sort out the rest.
But the trade-offs of this model are playing out right in front of us. When you maximize pure freedom and market competition, inequality doesn't just persist, it compounds. You get a society where infrastructure and well-being become incredibly uneven. A billionaire can fly to space, while a block away, people are living in tents beneath crumbling bridges. There is this constant grinding tension between the liberty of the individual to accumulate endless wealth and the collective need for a stable, healthy public square.
The insight there is that freedom scales brilliantly, but it naturally mathematically creates gaps. So taking all these failures together, More, Plato, New Harmony, the Soviets, the pure capitalists, the document synthesizes exactly why perfection keeps failing. It boils down to 4 undeniable laws of human society.
Let's hit them. Number 1, trade-offs are unavoidable.
You cannot maximize every variable. Total freedom inherently destroys total equality. Absolute stability naturally suffocates aggressive innovation. You have to choose your pain.
Number 2, humans are inconsistent.
We are not perfectly rational algorithms. We are driven by status, by jealousy, by altruism, by fear. A system that requires humans to be perfectly selfless 100% of the time will fail 100% of the time.
Number 3, scale breaks systems.
This is a huge one. A community of 50 people can operate on pure social trust. If Bob doesn't do his chores, everyone glares at Bob until he does. But a society of 50 million people requires bureaucracy to function, and bureaucracy naturally becomes rigid, self-serving, and alienated from the people it governs.
And number 4, which I think is the most profound insight in the entire text, success creates new problems.
This is the ultimate trap of utopian thinking. Let's say you perfectly solve a problem, you maximize innovation, and your society becomes incredibly wealthy. That very success creates the new problem of massive wealth inequality and class resentment. Or you maximize peace and stability, and your society becomes so safe that it leads to cultural stagnation and a restless youth who have never known hardship. The solutions of today are the crises of tomorrow.
Which leads to the massive paradigm shift of this entire deep dive. If a perfect ruler is a myth, and a single ideology always creates massive blind spots, and success just breeds new problems, then a single person, or a single rigid ideology, can never run a utopia.
Precisely. No one has ever built a static, perfect society, and no one ever will. The better question, the one this document pivots towards entirely, is not how do we build a perfect society, but how do we build a society that is capable of continuously rebalancing itself?
And that question sets up the absolute wildest, most fascinating part of this source document. The author introduces a radical new framework for governance. Instead of hoping for one perfect philosopher king or handing all power to one single dominant ideology, they propose a highly decentralized system mapped out across 10 distinct personality lenses. They call it the Subpersonatopia.
It is a brilliant piece of governance architecture. It operates on a core biological principle, much like the human body. Your body needs cells to die to make room for new ones, but it also needs an immune system to stop too much destruction. It's a balance of opposing forces. In Subpersonatopia, the responsibility of society is distributed across 10 specialized perspectives, or subpersonalities. Every domain is championed by a specific persona who fights fiercely for their area, but they are constantly checked and challenged by all the others. There is no single point of failure.
It's like a boardroom where everyone has a veto, but they all desperately need the company to survive. Let's meet the board, the Council of 10. To make this real, let's group them by the roles they play. Let's start with the foundation, the people who keep the floor from collapsing beneath our feet. Domain number 1, infrastructure, championed by Bannock.
Danik is the builder leader. The document describes him as reliable, stoic, a long-term systems thinker. He is the guy looking at the 50-year lifespan of a bridge, not the 4-year election cycle. He builds the transportation networks, the power grids, the national resilience against disasters. His inherent bias is stability over flash.
So no flying cars for Vanek.
Definitely no flying cars. He wants a train system that never derails. His absolute mandate is simple. Things work. Always.
And standing next to him in the foundation is Domain 7. Political structure, designed by Val.
Val is the discipline strategist. She is the constitutional architect. She honestly doesn't care who is in power. She cares about the rules of how power is constrained. She designs the checks and balances, the anti-corruption mechanisms, the institutional accountability. Her bias is order over chaos and merit over popularity. She ensures the system survives the people running it. Her mandate: power is earned and controlled.
And completing the foundation is Domain 10, military and defense, commanded by Devon.
Devon is the protector, absolute discipline, hyper-vigilant. He manages the defense systems, intelligence, and strategic deterrence. His bias is strength, but with absolute restraint. He understands that the outside world is dangerous. His mandate is, we are safe, but not cruel.
Okay, so Vanek, Val, and Devon have built a fortress. It's safe, the power is on, the laws are strict, but if that's all you have, you're just living in a prison. You need the heart, you need the people who ensure the system serves humans, not the other way around. Enter Domain 2. Tolerance, governed by Kelly.
Kelly is the caregiver. She is empathy first. While Val looks at the law, Kelly looks at the person being crushed by the law. She manages civil rights, social safety nets, community mediation. Her bias is to protect the vulnerable, the marginalized, the people who fall through the cracks of the economy or Bannock's efficiency. Her mandate: no one is invisible.
Then we have Domain 3. Cultural richness, led by Addie.
Addie is the joy bringer. She is the total antithesis of Bannock's boring concrete. She is in charge of festivals, arts, public squares, shared rituals. She believes that a society only focused on survival isn't worth surviving for. She wants beauty, spontaneity, and meaning. Her mandate: life feels alive.
And keeping the heart grounded is Domain 5. Well-being, managed by Kenny.
Kenny is the grounded realist. He takes Addie's desire for joy and Kelly's empathy and turns them into practical data. He manages healthcare systems, housing policy, work-life balance regulations. He asks, does this specific policy actually lower the blood pressure of a real citizen today? His mandate: life is livable.
Okay, we have a safe fortress, and the people inside are happy and cared for. But society will stagnate and die if it doesn't move forward. We need the engine. Domain 4. Innovation, championed by Tommy.
Tommy is the inventor, the disruptor. He is naturally curious and loves dismantling Val's rules and Bannock structures just to see if a better way exists. He leads R&D, tech development, and experimental zones where failure is celebrated. His bias is exploration over certainty. His mandate: we don't stagnate.
And driving that engine is Domain 8. Economic structure, built by Liz. And honestly, reading the document, Liz terrifies me a little bit.
She should. Liz is the power player. She is unapologetically ambitious. She understands human incentives, status, and desire. She builds the markets. While Kelly wants everyone to be perfectly equal, Liz knows that humans need to compete. She builds systems that reward excellence, risk, and hard work. Her bias is to make ambition desirable but transparent. Her mandate: ambition has somewhere to go.
And finally, we have the navigators. The domains that help people process all this complexity. Domain 6. Social norms, governed by Mac.
Mac is the social navigator. He is the guy who understands the unwritten rules: humor, cultural tone, social mobility, public etiquette. He manages the space between who we are privately and how we behave publicly. His mandate: people know how to exist together.
And Domain 9. Religion and meaning, cultivated by Tira.
Tira is the philosopher. She explores the deep existential questions that science and economics can't answer. She cultivates ethical frameworks and spaces for spiritual exploration, but crucially, without enforcing a single-state dogma. Her bias is questions over answers. Her mandate: truth is explored, not enforced.
So those are the 10 subpersonalities, and I want to pause here, because the source makes a point that is absolutely critical to understand. This Council of 10 is not holding hands and singing Kumbaya. This is a utopia of managed tension.
That is the genius of the entire framework. Utopias fail because they try to eliminate conflict. Subpersonatopia works because it weaponizes conflict. Think about it. Bannock wants to build permanent, massive concrete rail systems. Tommy wants to tear up the concrete and test autonomous drones. They are in fundamental opposition.
Right. Kelly wants to tax the rich at 90% to ensure absolutely zero poverty. But Liz wants low taxes to incentivize billionaires to build new industries. Val wants rigid, unbending laws. Mac wants flexible social grace. Tira wants to question the very nature of reality. Devin needs strict, unquestioning obedience in the military ranks.
Every champion has massive, acknowledged blind spots. Liz doesn't care about the vulnerable. That's Kelly's job. Devin doesn't care about art. That's Addie's job. The system relies on the fact that no single persona ever wins completely. They grind against each other, and the friction produces a balanced, adaptive society.
But I have to push back here. In theory, a boardroom debate sounds great. But what happens in a crisis? Let's say a massive pandemic hits.
Okay, good example.
Bannock wants to lock down the entire grid to protect the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Devin wants to deploy the military to enforce quarantines. Kelly wants to shut down the economy to save every single vulnerable life. But Liz is screaming that if you shut down the economy, the supply chains will collapse and millions will starve. If these domains fundamentally clash in a life-or-death scenario, doesn't the society just crack in half?
It's the ultimate stress test. And to answer how a society navigates that exact kind of extreme tension, the source document shifts away from theory and looks at reality. It sets up a showdown between two modern nations that represent opposite ends of this management spectrum, nations that have somehow handled these exact crises incredibly well, Denmark and Singapore.
The showdown. Denmark, the soft utopia versus Singapore, the hard utopia. Let's break down how these two actually function on the ground.
Denmark is built entirely on the philosophy of high social trust. The assumption is that if you give people freedom, security, and a strong safety net, they will naturally do the right thing for the collective. It leans heavily into Kelly's empathy, Addie's cultural joy, and Kenny's well-being. It's a human-centered design. Their response to a crisis is usually consensus-driven and relies on voluntary civic duty.
Whereas Singapore is the complete opposite. It is hyper-efficient, highly structured, and built on institutional trust. The assumption in Singapore is that humans are flawed, so the systems must be rigorously designed to enforce the right behavior. It is about elite technocratic execution, density, and absolute discipline. It leans heavily on Bannock's infrastructure, vowel structure, and Liz's hyper-competitive economy.
Exactly. Let's look at housing to see the difference mechanically. In Denmark, housing is heavily subsidized but largely decentralized. In Singapore, over 80% of the population lives in public housing built by the government. But Singapore uses a hard system to enforce a soft society goal. They have strict ethnic quotas for every single apartment block to ensure that Chinese, Malay, and Indian citizens live next to each other. They mathematically enforce integration to prevent ethnic enclaves and racial tension.
Wow. That is Val and Bannock forcing Kelly's tolerance through pure structural engineering. But the document highlights what Denmark and Singapore surprisingly have in common. First, a zero-tolerance policy for infrastructure failure. Basic systems just work. Second, incredible urban intentionality. Neither country grew by accident. And third, they maintain a very careful balance of guided freedom.
And fourth, which is the magic number in this whole document, they both have a population of right around 6 million people.
Let's talk about that number. Why 6 million? Is that like Dunbar's number scaled up for a nation?
Essentially, yes. It seems to be a demographic sweet spot for a modern nation-state. 6 million is large enough to sustain a complex internal economy, specialized industries, and global relevance. You have enough smart people to build a world-class tech sector, but it is small enough that national coordination is actually possible. The feedback loops between the government and the citizens are tight. The bureaucracy hasn't scaled into an unmanageable leviathan yet.
So when the author translates this into the ultimate subpersonatopia design, they don't pick Denmark or Singapore. They propose a hybrid formula. The core thesis is soft society, hard systems.
It is a brilliant, highly pragmatic synthesis. The lived experience of the citizen walking down the street, the soft society, feels like Denmark. You experience personal freedom, cultural warmth, high social trust, and meaning. But the underlying mechanics running the country in the background, the hard systems, operate like Singapore. The power grids, the economic regulations, the anti-corruption laws, the legal accountability, those are enforced with absolute ruthless efficiency.
But the text issues a huge, glaring warning here. You cannot just mash them together and get the best of both worlds for free. The more Singaporean hard system control you add to guarantee stability, the more Danish soft society freedom you naturally lose. You have to decide, as a culture, exactly how much personal liberty you're willing to trade for collective stability.
And if we were to make that choice, if we were to take this hybrid blueprint, a 6 million person soft society, hard system republic, and place it on a physical map today, where would it actually go?
This is where the document turns into a real estate pitch, and I love it. Location scouting for the next utopia. It looks for real-world candidates that could host this upgraded civilization. It needs a place small enough to govern, strong enough institutionally to build upon, and geographically suited for a century of climate and trade disruptions. Let's look at the shortlist.
First contender, Costa Rica. Population of about 5.2 million. It abolished its military entirely in 1949, investing all that money into education and healthcare. It is the ultimate Kelly and Kenny candidate: high empathy, high well-being, incredible biodiversity.
But geopolitically, the text points out that having no military in an increasingly multipolar, aggressive world is a massive liability. You can't just hope nobody attacks you. What about Slovenia?
Slovenia is fascinating. Population of about 2.1 million. The text calls it a quiet overachiever. High human development, deeply stable, and crucially, it has the port of Koper, giving it vital access to the Adriatic Sea and global shipping lanes. But it faces severe demographic stagnation and an aging population.
Estonia is the digital darling, about 1.3 million people. Their digital state is genuinely world-class. You can start a business online in 5 minutes. It's the Tommy and Val choice: highly innovative, hyper-efficient governance. But they share a massive border with an aggressive Russia, which makes their long-term stability geographically precarious.
And Mauritius, the wild card. Also about 1.3 million people. An island nation in the Indian Ocean. Incredible ethnic diversity, a booming trade hub, and widely recognized as Africa's most robust full democracy.
But none of them win. The winner, the place the source document explicitly selects as the absolute best all-around geographic and cultural fit for this Denmark-Singapore hybrid, is Uruguay.
Uruguay.
Wait, Uruguay? Seriously,
Yeah.
you're telling me we are bypassing tech giants like Estonia and wealthy European hubs to pick a country of 3.4 million people in South America? Walk me through the math on that, because on the surface, to a lot of listeners, that might sound totally random.
It's actually a geostrategic masterstroke when you look at the raw data the document provides. First, look at geography and climate. Uruguay has a temperate maritime climate. That means predictable seasons, plenty of rain, and high agricultural yields. It sits on the Guarani Aquifer, one of the largest freshwater reserves on the planet. Water is the oil of the 21st century.
Okay, water's good. What about trade?
It has a massive coastline and the deepwater port of Montevideo on the Rio de la Plata. It is perfectly positioned as a logistics hub for the entire South Atlantic. Second, look at energy. Uruguay is already operating at roughly 98% renewable electricity, mostly wind and hydro. They have already solved the green grid problem that is crippling other nations.
Okay, but what about the political culture? You can't just drop a complex governance system onto a corrupt state.
Exactly, and this is Uruguay's superpower. It regularly ranks as the most stable, least corrupt, most egalitarian full democracy in all of Latin America. It has a deeply entrenched civic tradition. The population is highly educated, highly secular, and culturally progressive. And the population is currently 3.4 million, which gives you plenty of room to intentionally grow toward that 6 million sweet spot without overcrowding.
But hold on, this brings up a massive logistical question. How are we actually doing this? Are we just buying a chunk of empty land in Uruguay, throwing a sci-fi dome over it, and inviting millions of Silicon Valley engineers and Danish urban planners to move there?
No, and the document is fiercely explicit about rejecting that approach. The build it and they will come Greenfield City project is a proven catastrophic failure. The text cites Malaysia's Forest City as a cautionary tale. They spent billions building a hyper-modern, eco-friendly smart city from scratch, and it's largely a ghost town.
Why? If you build perfect buildings, why wouldn't people come?
Because you cannot buy social capital. You cannot instantly manufacture history, culture, or civic trust. Talent follows functioning, organic systems. Functioning systems rarely follow raw, imported talent. You must build on existing social roots.
So we aren't starting from zero. We are taking an existing, high-functioning sovereign nation, Uruguay, and giving it a massive software and hardware upgrade. We respect the people and the culture already there, and then we recruit selectively to fill in the missing pieces to reach that 6 million mark.
Exactly. So let's actually walk the streets of this newly upgraded coastal republic. Let's paint the sensory picture of Subpersonatopia as the source describes it.
I love this section. The document gives such a vivid, tactile walkthrough of what daily life feels like. Geographically, the population is centered heavily along the southern coast. The Montevideo-Canelón Maldonado corridor. But it's not a concrete jungle. The climate allows life to happen outdoors most of the year. The text describes the urban layout as a polished civic garden. You have dense, walkable neighborhoods connected by high-speed, silent electric rail lines. The architecture is integrated with protected coastal wetlands, massive wind corridors powering the grid, and solar arrays. It is engineered for climate resilience.
And demographically, this society is highly intentional. Remember, they're growing from 3.4 million to about 6 million over a few decades. This growth does not happen through chaotic open borders. It happens through deeply strategic, values-based, and skills-based immigration. And the civic identity they forge is crucial. It is based entirely on constitutional loyalty and active participation, not on bloodline, ethnicity, or ancient history.
The text even provides the exact target demographic mix for this mature 6 million person society. And the numbers matter. They target 55 to 60% Uruguayan root population.
Which is essential. You must maintain a clear majority of the host culture to prevent a nationalist backlash. If the locals feel replaced, the society fractures.
Then 15 to 20% a broader Latin American mix, pulling talent from the region. 10 to 12% European origin. 8 to 10% Asian origin, specifically pulling urban planners, engineers, and administrators from places like Singapore, Korea, and Japan to install those hard systems. And 5 to 8% African and Afro-diaspora communities, bringing dynamic cultural and economic ties.
And they also strictly manage the age structure. They aim for 22% youth to ensure constant renewal and energy, 58% working-age adults to power the economic engine, and 20% older citizens to provide institutional memory, restraint, and childcare support. This deliberate ratio avoids the devastating demographic collapse, the aging out that countries like Japan, Italy, and South Korea are facing right now.
Politically, it's a constitutional civic republic. They use a bicameral system to balance short-term democracy with long-term strategy. The lower house is a parliamentary core directly elected by the people, messy, democratic, responsive. But the upper house is a technocratic chamber of heavily vetted experts with long-term limits. You don't get to vote on the math of a bridge. You let the engineers in the upper house handle it.
And economically, Liz has designed a hyper-focus machine. They know they can't compete with the US or China and everything, so they specialize. Their major exports are green aviation and maritime fuels, advanced agricultural technology, digital government tech software selling their digital state infrastructure to other nations, and massive port logistics.
I love how the text describes their global brand. They aren't trying to be a superpower. They don't want a massive military projecting force across the globe. They aim to be the world's leading human-scaled advanced republic. They are the place that actually solves the hard, boring problems that plague everyone else. Clean energy grids that stay cheap, ports that run without unions striking or supply chains breaking, sensibly regulated AI, attainable middle-class housing.
The daily feel of living there sounds incredible. Morning commutes on clean ferries and electric trams. Digital paperwork paying taxes, renewing a license is instantaneous and mostly invisible. Public schools are rigorous but not soul-crushing. Neighborhoods are deliberately mixed income, so the wealthy CEO lives a few blocks from the school teacher, keeping the elite tethered to the reality of the civic fabric. They prize sincerity and competence over pretension and status games.
The phrase the author uses to describe the city at night is my favorite. It glows rather than blares. It's not the neon assault of Times Square, and it's not a dark, sleepy village. It's just warm, functional competence.
It sounds idyllic. It sounds like the perfect synthesis of everything we've talked about. But the author of the document does not let us off the hook that easily. They end the thought experiment by pulling back the curtain. Because beneath this beautiful surface, beneath the flawless rail lines and the glowing skyline, there are 7 hidden forces. 7 deep, systemic risks that could tear this entire society apart if they start paying attention for even a decade.
The make-or-break forces. This is where the utopian dream meets reality. Let's go through them. Number 1, the cultural software problem.
The premise here is brutal. You can import physical infrastructure, but you cannot import social trust. You can hire Singaporean engineers to build your water system and Danish architects to build your bike lanes, but Denmark's trust or Singapore's discipline. Those are cultural habits software built over centuries of shared hardship and history. If you are importing millions of new citizens from all over the world into this subpersonatopia, how do you teach them those civic habits?
Right. If someone moves from a highly corrupt country where the survival strategy is to cheat the system, how long does it take them to realize they don't have to cheat here? And if they keep cheating, does a high-trust system collapse? If the culture doesn't constantly reproduce itself in the schools and neighborhoods, the hard systems will eventually fail because the soft society has rotted from the inside.
Which leads directly into force number 2, which is maybe the most hotly debated political issue in the world today. The immigration trilemma, the who gets in problem.
The document lays out the map on this, and it's ruthless. You essentially have 3 choices for your borders, and they all come with massive existential risks. You can't have it all.
Exactly. Option 1. Your borders are entirely open. You get incredible diversity, massive labor inflows, and high cultural energy. But you risk severe social fragmentation. Mac, our social norm subpersonality, loses his mind because there are no shared baseline rules. Trust plummets. Option 2. Your borders are totally closed. You maintain perfect social cohesion and high trust because everyone is the same. But you risk demographic stagnation and economic death. Tommy, the innovator, starves because no new ideas or hungry workers are coming in.
Option 3. Selective, heavily managed, skills-based immigration. This is what the document suggests for subpersonatopia. It is optimal for the economy, and it protects social cohesion. But it is politically and morally fragile. Kelly, the caregiver, will constantly protest that the system is elitist, cruel, and turns away desperate people who just want a better life. The tension is permanent.
Force number 3, the second generation problem. And man, we see this in every successful company and every successful empire. The 14th century philosopher Ibn Khaldun wrote about this with his concept of asabiya, or social cohesion. Generation 1 builds the utopia. They suffered in the old world, so they are hungry, disciplined, and grateful for the new systems.
Generation 2 grows up inside the utopia. They enjoy the stability, they maintain it, but they take it slightly for granted because they never knew the chaos that came before it. And Generation 3. Generation 3 gets restless. Life is so comfortable, so predictable, that they feel alienated. They start questioning the foundational rules. They might literally tear down the walls just to feel something, or because they naively believe the walls aren't holding back anything dangerous. If your society is too perfect, the third generation will destroy it out of sheer existential boredom.
Which ties perfectly into force number 4. Success attracts pressure. Let's assume subpersonatopia actually works. It is safe, wealthy, green, and stable. What happens next? The rest of the world notices.
Global billionaires will flood the real estate market trying to buy a safe haven, driving housing prices to astronomical levels and pricing out the working class. Millions of desperate climate refugees will swarm the borders. The very success of the system threatens to overwhelm its capacity. Liz, managing the economy, and Bannock, managing the infrastructure, have to execute perfectly just to prevent the society from being crushed by its own popularity.
Force number 5. Power drift. This is a law of political physics. Even good, well-intentioned, highly democratic systems slowly centralize power over time. Bureaucracies naturally expand to justify their own budgets. Elites consolidate their wealth and influence. Accountability drops. If Val designs a perfect political structure on day 1, by year 50, it might become so rigid and captured by special interests that it cannot adapt to a new crisis.
That's why the system needs built-in reset buttons, term limits, aggressive citizen review mechanisms, periodic constitutional audits. Val must literally design ways for her own system to be challenged, broken down, and rebuilt, otherwise it ossifies into tyranny.
Force number 6. The external world. Subpersonatopia is not floating in a magic bubble in outer space. It is sitting on the coast of South America on planet Earth. It has to deal with real-world, messy geopolitics.
Right. What happens if a massive global superpower demands they hand over their tech secrets or threatens a naval blockade of their port? What happens when global shipping routes collapse due to a war halfway across the world? Devin, the military protector, and Liz, the economist, have to constantly navigate a non-utopian planet to keep their utopian island afloat.
And finally, force number 7, which is the most philosophical, but perhaps the most deadly. The meaning versus comfort problem. Let's say Kenny perfectly optimizes everyone's well-being. Everyone has a beautiful home, perfect free healthcare, a 30-hour work week, and a robot to do their laundry. What do they actually do with their lives?
It's the last man concept from Nietzsche. High well-being societies frequently report an epidemic of loneliness, a lack of purpose, or existential drift. When the struggle to survive is removed, the human brain, which evolved to solve problems and overcome threats, starts turning on itself.
This is exactly why building a utopia isn't actually about solving all problems forever. It's about consciously choosing which set of problems you'd rather deal with on a daily basis.
That is the deepest insight of this entire massive deep dive. You are not designing a machine that runs perfectly forever. You are designing an engine of managed tension. You desperately need Tyra's philosophy and Addie's cultural joy to give people a reason to wake up when comfort isn't enough. You need Tommy's disruptive, chaotic innovation to break Bannock's rigid infrastructure when it gets too old and bureaucratic.
You need the friction. The friction is the fire that keeps the society warm.
Okay, let's bring this all together. What an absolute ride this document has been. We started by looking at the sweeping, brutal infrastructure of Rome, the deep but culture-specific well-being of Denmark, the intense technocratic execution of Singapore. And we used them to build this incredible, hypothetical, upgraded coastal republic in Uruguay. And what we learned is that the ultimate society is one of balanced, constant tension.
Freedom constantly pushing against the need for control. Innovation pulling against the desire for stability. The human need for comfort wrestling with the human need for purpose.
And bringing it right back to you, the listener. The brilliance of this document isn't just in the grand world building. It is a mirror for your own life. Think about your own team at work or your own family. You have a Bannock in your life who just wants reliable processes and hates change. You have a Tommy who wants to disrupt everything and try the risky new strategy. You have a Kelly demanding empathy for the team's burnout, and a Liz demanding competitive excellence and revenue. If you, as the leader, try to silence any of them to achieve a fake, quiet harmony, your team will eventually fail.
You have to manage the tension. You have to let them fight productively. It's the exact same domains of human nature, just scaled down from a nation of 6 million to a conference room of 6 people.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I know you. You always find that one lingering, slightly provocative thread in the research that wasn't fully resolved. What is the final thought you want to leave us with today?
It's something that builds on the document's central revelation about adaptivity. We've established that the closest thing to utopia isn't a final destination, but an adaptive system that continually rebalances itself to survive changing circumstances. But that raises a terrifying question for anyone who wants to build something permanent. If a system must be perfectly adaptive to survive, does that mean a true utopia must inherently have an expiration date?
Oh, wow. Elaborate on that. What do you mean?
Historically, empires like Rome or dynasties like the Tang tried to build physical and legal structures that would last for 1,000 years. They sought permanence, but that very obsession with permanence is what led to their rigidity, their inability to adapt, and their eventual bloody collapse. But if Subpersonatopia is truly adaptive, perhaps the ultimate utopian design feature is programmed obsolescence.
The self-destruct button.
More like a graceful dismantling. What if the most advanced society is one that is intentionally programmed to recognize when its current operating system, its constitution, its borders, its economic model, no longer serves the future? Instead of fighting a brutal civil war to preserve a dead ideal, the society is engineered to peacefully step aside, dismantle its own structures, and rebuild from the ground up for the next generation. It's the ultimate humility in governance, something that you mull over.
That is heavy. But it is incredibly fitting. You don't build a house to stand empty for 1,000 years. You build it to shelter the specific people who are living in it right now. And when the family grows or the climate changes, you don't force the people to fit the house. You tear it down and you draw a new blueprint. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. It has been an absolute pleasure to build and dismantle this world with you today.